are joined now from Davos by Oxfam's Executive Director, Amitabh Behar. Very good evening to you, and thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us.
Good evening, and thank you for inviting me.
Having spent the past few days in Davos, I'm just wondering what your impressions are about this year's WIF gathering. Are the real issues on the table, or are they being obfuscated by the high political drama occurring in, the geopolitical theatre?
I'm glad you're asking this because today was a day of high drama with President Trump speaking. And you're absolutely right that the real issues of the people do not seem to be center staged. Like every year, we released our inequality report, which in many ways headlines the World Economic Forum. And the report comes up with some very startling facts, figures, and that should really be the core conversation, and that's not been in many ways shaping the conversation this year. So it would really be critical if WEF wants to be representing a multi-stakeholder space for really diverse voices, then they need to reshape the agenda.
And let's just start with your report at high level. What are you highlighting for WEF leaders to look at that should be at the forefront of the conversation?
Our report looks at the growing inequalities, and this year we've seen that the billionaire wealth now sits at $18.3 trillion. And just last year, they have added $2.5 trillion to their kitty, which is three times faster than the previous years. But let me just give you a sense of the numbers. $2.5 trillion is adequate for eradicating poverty 26 times over. So this is the kind of accumulation of wealth happening absolutely at the top for the billionaires when we see still 50% of the global population lives in poverty. One in four still sleeps hungry. They do not get three square meals a day. So that's really the situation that we are witnessing. But very importantly, what we are also seeing that these billionaires are not happy being rich and richer and very, very rich. Now they have started buying political power. So what they're doing is essentially buying media houses, buying votes, buying parties, financing elections, and pretty much buying governments. So the report also highlights that at this moment, billionaires are 4,000 times more likely to hold political office compared to an average citizen. So this is really about our future, about our democracies, which seems to be getting completely compromised. And what we are seeing is massive rise of oligarchic power.
And this comes off the Stiglitz report from the G20, which was recently held in South Africa, where for the first time we had that global report on poverty and inequality. And the World Bank is now estimating that nearly 800 million people globally live in extreme poverty. But, it begs the question, why have annual themes? This year's is a spirit of dialogue. And we know from what we're seeing from the current geopolitics, dialogue is not something that is being entertained. It's just unilateralism.
Yes, as in first, let me appreciate the G20 in South Africa. It did decisively look at questions of inequality, and many of us who work on these issues are very grateful that the Stiglitz Commission was formed, and now you have a recommendation to create the International Inequality Panel. That's really a positive step. At this moment, you're really I would say, bang on in terms of saying that while we are talking of the spirit of dialogue, multilateralism seems to be not just fragile, it seems to be broken. So, what we would suggest and what's been our request is that we need to understand that a lot of this is happening because of the economic system. In fact, when we come to WEF, we try and tell colleagues that let's not talk of a poly crisis, that there is an inequality crisis, hunger crisis, climate crisis. These are different manifestations of the same crisis of the economic system that's been created, which is essentially rigged in favor of the super rich. So, what we are seeing is an economic system favoring the billionaires, which now they are using to further consolidate political power. And in that, dialogue is really not a possibility because this is about the super rich. But let me just say that while the super rich try and consolidate more and more power, uh, we want to remind people that when people live with economic poverty, it leads to hunger. But when people have political poverty, it leads to anger. And that is what we are witnessing. Last year, while we saw the consolidation of wealth at the top level, on the other hand, we did see 144 large scale protests in more than 60 countries, which is essentially questioning the choices the governments are making to further support consolidation of wealth for business instead of actually protecting freedoms of the common people, ensuring more schools, more teachers, more nurses, more daycare for the common citizens.
And, as you talk about influence buying and consolidation of power, there are reports suggesting that more and more wealthy people are doing that in many countries. And as you also speak about the protests that we're seeing, I'm thinking about Iran, I'm thinking about Madagascar. We've just seen elections in Uganda. There's also a rise in repression. So I'm just wondering, as world leaders gather in Davos this week, this year, are they really ever going to be able to focus on the bread and butter issue, the structural exclusion of women and vulnerable groups in these high level economic discussions that they're going to have?
So these billionaires are accumulating more power, and in defense of these billionaires' capital, you're seeing states use repressive measures. They are taking away the civil and political rights of people. Uh, Groups which are talking of their fundamental rights are being repressed. Civil and political rights are diminishing. All this is happening. But I would really say that it is, I think it's the time for us to get our gaze right. We cannot continue looking at global leaders to deliver the transformative change that common people aspire for. It is people's efforts. It's going to be people coming together, and that's what, as you said, from starting from Indonesia to Peru, from Madagascar to Morocco to Kenya to I come from India. So if you just look at countries around me, 2 years ago, we saw a regime change because of people's movement in Sri Lanka. Last year in Bangladesh, led by students' protest. Few months earlier in Nepal, Gen Z protest. So people are making change happen, and that's what I really hope that the global leadership wakes up to this reality. Just because most of the media is controlled by, again, those same billionaires, you don't get to see the stories, but people who are connected with the ground, with common people, know that there's very strong narrative of anger. And I really hope that regimes understand this and take decisive steps in favor of the people. Let me say that inequality is not inevitable. It is a policy and political choices governments make, and must change in favor of building a just and equal future.
And I totally agree with you on that. A very profound note to end this conversation on. Thank you so much for speaking to us. Really appreciate it. That's the director. Rather, that is Oxfam's
Thank you.
executive
Thank you.
director, Amitabh Behar, speaking to us from Davos in Switzerland, where the World Economic Forum is.